So we've been reading throughout Hosea about the problem the kingdom of Israel had. And the problem the kingdom of Israel had was they had no gratefulness. They were given so much by God. They were protected as they were brought out of Egypt. They were given protection from their enemies, victory over their enemies. They were given a blessed land flowing with milk and honey, fields that just produced tons of fruits and vegetables. They barely had to work the land. It was like the land would be before the curse. Because remember, before it was easy to work the land. Only afterwards was it difficult, and only particularly after Cain. Remember how Cain was extremely fruitful? He was able to produce fruit. Well, whenever part of his curse came along, it was that the land would no longer yield its strength. But Israel was a special piece of property, and God had promised them he's going to provide for them and make the land very fruitful unless they turned away and started following other gods. And sadly, that's exactly what happened. More so in the kingdom of Israel, but the kingdom of Judah wasn't far behind. So that's kind of the setting where we see Hosea so far essentially writing a letter of divorcement, sending Israel away because they had rejected the love of God. So that takes us to Hosea chapter 12, and we'll start with verse 1. So Ephraim, that's another name for the kingdom of Israel, feedeth on wind and followeth after the east wind. He daily increaseth lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. So the east wind, biblically, what is that? Does anybody have any thoughts on what the east wind is from the Bible? The good thing, bad thing, nothing? In one place it was a good thing, and everywhere else it was a bad thing. So it's a little bit, the answer was both. You can't really get this one wrong, right? The east wind is actually what came and drove the Red Sea, right, apart. So the kingdom of Israel, or the nation of Israel at the time, could actually travel across on dry land. So the east wind is a good thing if you're in the will of God. But to those who are not in the will of God, how did the east wind help out the Egyptians that day? It was a catastrophe, right? It was horrible. So the point is, the east wind is generally in the Bible destructive, right? It destroys, it scatters, wipes out everything in its path. You can find references to that in Isaiah 27, verse 8, Job 38, verse 24, Psalm 48, 7, Ezekiel 27, 26. And then there's a few other places in Job 15, 2, 27, 21, Jonah chapter 4, verse 8, Jeremiah 18, 17. So it generally brings destruction and famine, and particularly if you're out of the will of God. Well, Israel in this situation, are they in the will of God? Clearly not, right? They're certainly against God. And the destructive force in that day, who was God going to use as the destructive force? The Assyrians. He was going to come and capture the kingdom of Israel and take them into captivity and then disperse them among the nations. Now, notice what he says, as you feed on the wind. I got to tell you, I've got a pretty amazing body. My wife will tell you. But the point is, when I go out on the beach and I'm wearing a nice and baggy t-shirt and I stand just at the right angle, that t-shirt will inflate, and man, I'll look like I got some massive muscles. You guys know what I'm talking about. You ever had a baggy shirt on? So you get this nice, filled up shirt. But you know what? What happens when you change your angle? It deflates, right? Go right back to where you were. So imagine what it means to feed on the wind. Sure, it looks good. It looks like things are full, right? But at the end of the day, is your stomach ever going to be satisfied? Are you ever really going to have those muscles? No, it's going to deflate. The wind can't fulfill, right? So Israel's feeding on the wind. That's essentially what Israel's worship was. Emptiness, nothing. They filled themselves with riches and worshiping false gods, making covenants with earthly kingdoms and abandoning the only one who actually wanted to help them and could fulfill them. And that only one, of course, is God. So they spent all their riches to try and please Egypt and Assyria. and try to make peace and try to hire soldiers to defend them. So you see how foolish they were, and history shows us what happened to them. So let's look at America today, or really any of the modern nations that we think of. Do you feel like sometimes we've lost our soul? That really we're emptiness? When I was a kid and they would play the song, and I'm proud to be an American. I mean, my gosh, you'd swell up, you get tingles thinking about what people did and the heroics. And man, when the fireworks are blasting, now it's hard to say I'm proud to be an American, to see how divided we are, to see how sad. But is it just because we're divided, or is it because we lost something way more precious than just our unity? Is it because we lost God? Exactly. We lost Jesus. We don't fill our soul with anything. If you want to know, take a survey. I would just ask anyone, ask somebody this week, what are you looking forward to? Just ask that question. What are you excited about? Your answer is going to be the new superhero movie, right? Your answer is going to be, oh, there's a new series on Netflix. I can't wait to see it. I mean, we always want some new method to entertain ourselves. There's a new restaurant coming to Moundsville. Do you see how sad and empty and pathetic, sad and empty and pathetic that is? But we have essentially, we refuse to acknowledge that the donut, yes, Dunkin' Donuts, and there's supposed to be a hibachi coming too, but that's a side note. So, but the point is, Americans refuse to acknowledge that what they're lacking is their creator. They refuse to acknowledge that what they're lacking. Now, I don't like to use the word a God-sized hole. If you had a God-sized hole in you, you would not exist. But the point being, we need our creator. You're cut off from your creator when you reject him and look to other things. And guess what? No matter how much you fill yourself with, it's nothing but emptiness. It's just emptiness after emptiness. And you say, well, if I just get married, it'll be great. Well, if I just get that job, it'll be fantastic. Well, if I can just make her go out with me, it'll be great. No, it'll just be the next thing. That new car won't fill it. That pay raise won't fill it. You'll just find more needs, because that's not really what you need. It's just what you think you need. What you need is a relationship with your creator. And the only way to have that relationship is through the cross, through the blood of Christ. Period. That's the only thing that can satisfy. So Israel had lost that. They had lost that relationship with God. Why? The kingdom of Israel, unlike the kingdom of Judah, even though the kingdom of Judah many times invited them to come to it, they were cut off from the temple. They were cut off from the holy place to go and to worship their God, from the festivals and the feasts. They couldn't. So they instead worshiped all these false gods. Now, again, they were invited by the kingdom of Judah many times, but for the most part, they were separated from God. So then we get to verse 2, and Judah is not innocent here. We see in verse 2 through 5. It says, the Lord also hath also a controversy with Judah, and will punish Jacob, that's the entirety of Israel, kingdom of Judah, kingdom of Israel, according to his ways. According to his doings will he recompense him. Believe me when I say, you do not want God to judge you based on your doings. A lot of people say, well, I'm a good person. Do not go to God and say, this is why you should leave me alone, because I'm a good person, because he's going to reveal the truth. And that's what Judah's trying to say. Verse 3 says, he took his brother, talking about Jacob, by the heel in the womb, and by his strength he had power with God. Yea, he had power over the angel, and prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. Even the Lord God of hosts, the Lord is his memorial. So the nation of Israel, both of these kingdoms, has been struggling with God since their inception. What does the name Israel mean? One who wrestles with God, right? Who's constantly, and why is it that Israel wrestles with God? Well, we all wrestle with God. All nations would wrestle with God. It's just that God chose to dwell with them. And of course, that's going to come to some problems. Why? Because we have a holy God and an unholy people. We have people that just cannot attain to that holiness. Something has to bridge the gap. And of course, again, as we mentioned, that bridge is Jesus Christ. So Israel, from their inception, from their forefather, Jacob, He's been wrestling with God from day one. And just like their forefather, they had lived in rebellion to God and tried to succeed with their own strength. They refused to stand back and let God run the show. Every time they couldn't do things themselves, what happened? God stepped in and took care of it. We have no water. I got you. We have no food. I got you. We're being surrounded. I got you. The walls are too high. I got you. And we laugh at Israel because the very next time they fall into the same trap, saying, what can we do? Are really any of you or myself any better? How many times did God got you? And how much more do you worry the next time? How much more do you fret and you concern yourself, right? That's God. Hindsight's 2020, right? So Jacob wrestled with God, or the angel of God, or the man, is depending on where you're reading, and insisted he be blessed. What should Jacob have done? If an angel of God, or specifically God in flesh, is what most people believe, and I believe that as well. If you believe God has come before you, what should you do? Should you fight and say, you got to give me a blessing, I'm not letting go? What would you do, Leonard? If you felt Jesus Christ came in right before you, what would you do? Be terrified and fall to the ground, right? But no, Jacob immediately was fighting with him, right? He then, because he was blessed, what did he commit to do? Remember what he promised God whenever he was on his way out of town and he went to sleep? Where was it he slept? What was the name of that place? Bethel, right? The house of God. That's why he called it Bethel. And he saw, what do they call it? Jacob's ladder, or Jacob's stairway to heaven, or whatever you want to call it. And he said, if you bring me back safely to this spot, I will worship you and you'll be my God, right? So Bethel, the location where God appeared to the nation Israel, had become what? That's where they put the calves and said, our God is this golden calf. Think about the insult that they were offering God. So God's reminding them, hey guys, remember, this is what Bethel's supposed to be. Hosea is telling them, this is where you're supposed to be worshiping God. And look what you have here. You have calves, and you're worshiping a cow. Back whenever I destroyed 3,000 by the commandment of Moses, whenever they had first been on Mount Sinai, right? So America, again, try to link it back to today. We would be wise. Look at our history. There was a lot of trusting in God, right? It'd be wise for us to realize where we were and where we are. Look at the morals, right, that God put for us. If we look back in history, and I'm not talking about the rest of the nation, look back at the history of the church, right? What was the purpose and the goal of the church? What is the purpose and goal of the church? What do we exist for? Spread the gospel. Do any of you believe that we are being effective at doing this? So nobody here believes that. What did you do different this past week than the week before, since we were so ineffective before? Did anybody do anything different? Or are we just going to pass each week, coming by, saying, let's encourage each other so that we can encourage each other to continue to be lukewarm? You're supposed to be on fire, right? If people don't hate you because you pester them with the truth, you're doing something wrong. I'm going to ask this question again next week, and I want to hear what you did different between now and then. We're supposed to be the body of Christ. The body of Christ. You know what Christ did when he was exhausted? What did he do when he was tired and the people showed up? He said, go watch Netflix. I'll talk with you tomorrow. Is that what he said? Of course not. There was no Netflix, right? But what did he say? He said, let them come, right? When he was tired and the little kids were brought to him, what did he say? Let the children come to me, right? So again, are we going about and spreading the gospel? I hope next week when I ask the same question, we'll hear a very different answer. I'll hear a number of answers of what people did different. This isn't a calling out. This is asking us to do what we're supposed to do, right? So the church is supposed to spread the gospels. And instead, we sit around in our homes, we play with our computers or our TVs or whatever, right? So there are a lot of things. We know that as we get to the end times, things are going to get worse, not better. When you look at short of the millennial reign, if you look at all the predictions of the end times, There are a few positive things. Knowledge will increase, travel will increase, people will have all kinds of riches, but most of the things are what? Very negative. Things are getting worse. Look around you. Realize what's happening. Things are getting worse. Time is running out. Spread the gospel. Don't be like Israel and just ride the wave out till it crashes. Right? Yes, sir.
I said to myself years ago, looking in the news, one day you hate to get some warning because the news will be worse and worse every day. You hate to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, all they have is bad news.
The Bible, but I knew this years ago because I was at Unproven.
Yeah, it really is. Every day is going to worsen and worsen and worsen, but we expect it to. That shouldn't make us nervous. That should fire us up to get to work, right? So, verse 6, we'll read verse 6 and 7. So, what's the advice here? Even through all this judgment, what's the advice? Verse 6 of chapter 12. Therefore, turn thou to thy God, keep mercy and judgment, and wait on thy God continually or always. He is a merchant. The balances of deceit are in his hand. He loveth to oppress. Well, who's he here? It's not God. God's not doing the balances of deceit. So Israel, the man, the human, Jacob, right? The person we're talking about, is told to observe kindness and justice and wait on God continually. That was the commandment given to Jacob way back in Genesis. And here Hosea is now telling Israel, the nation, rather than Israel, the man, to do the same, right? God had struck a bargain. He had made a covenant with Israel. They were specifically told, you cannot act like the nations around you. You cannot worship their gods. You can't follow their customs. You can't sacrifice your children. You can't send your wives and your daughters into prostitution. And what were they doing? Exactly what he told them not to do. So they were being cast out because of their wickedness. He told them the consequences. This was not news. They should have just looked back to what Moses had told them. So Israel tried to make the best deal for itself always, right? But they never wanted to keep the terms of the agreement or of the covenant. They didn't want to keep their side of the bargain. So they want to benefit from God, enjoy his blessings, but not live for him. Do you know what is so sad about this? Whenever he says he is a merchant, talking about Israel as a merchant, guess what the term for merchant is? You want to guess? It's in the Bible 120 times. The vast majority, 3 times it's translated merchant. Every other time it's translated Canaanite. Imagine what he's telling the nation of Israel. He says, you guys are Canaanites. That should cut like a knife. Think about it. You are the chosen people. You're separated. You get circumcised. You don't eat certain foods. You celebrate certain holidays. You're so totally separate from the world. You can't dress this way or cut your hair this way. And at the end, he's like, you're essentially Canaanites. You're not mine. How heartbreaking would this be? Remember what Jesus says? Yeah, in verse 7, he is a merchant. He is Canaan. Yeah, which is again a reasonable translation, right? But in this particular thing, he's talking about the balances and things. So the word Canaanite and the word merchant are the same. There's some synonyms. But the point is, to be a Canaanite, oof, that's like calling a Jew a Muslim. Go ahead, Leonard.
Here's the question. Is referring to Ephraim and Israel?
Yes.
And Judah and Jacob. Right?
So what I understand this to be is that when he's speaking of Jacob, because in the second verse he included Judah in the judgment, so I see Jacob as being the entirety of Israel. So he's kind of moved from just the kingdom of Israel to how all the nation of Israel has acted. Yeah. So he just said you're the same as the uncircumcised people, the people who aren't set apart. So that's a pretty terrible thing. I have a question. And again, I'm not trying to bash us because I'm involved in this group. Could the world always tell that we aren't one of them? Can they tell right now that the average Christian is not like the average unsaved? Sadly, we watch a lot of the same shows. We go to a lot of the same places. We behave a lot of the same ways. We enjoy the same gossip. We like to bash our leaders if we don't like them. we're involved in all kinds of nonsense, right? We get involved in conversations about social issues that we ought not care about, right? We ought to care about one thing. What is that? Salvation of other people. We all talk the good talk, but then we'll turn around and talk about whether it's the politics or the NFL or the NBA or whatever, right? All those things are interesting. Doesn't matter at the end of the day. It does not matter. Teach people about the love of Christ. That is the only thing that matters. Once you get them saved, I don't care what you talk about. Once you lead them to the cross, talk about whatever you want. But until that point, who cares? Who cares? Be advised about it. Be aware of it, but move on. We are here to do the work of Christ. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Government can do whatever it wants to do, right? Everybody can do whatever they want to do, but serve Christ. Absolutely. Just like Jesus did, right? With the Caesar thing. They asked him, they wanted to bring up a social issue. Excuse me. Wanted to bring up a social issue. But Jesus took that social issue and redirected it back. And that's what we ought to do. Hey, you're thirsty? You want some water? I'll give you living water. That's what I asked. Somebody asked me for a bottle of water. I said, not till you listen to the living water. No, I'm joking, but you can do that. You can tell them as you're giving them the bottle of water. You know, Jesus said a parable about this once, said that he's the living water as you hand him the water. It's not that weird. It's okay if it is weird. Share the gospel, right? All right. So God was going to judge Israel just as he had judged the Canaanites before them. Then you get to verse 8. And Ephraim, so now we're back to the kingdom of Israel, said, yet I am become rich. I have found me out substance. I've got stuff. In all my labors, they shall find none iniquity in me that were sin. So again, this is the same problem we always see. People think that blessings or what appear to be blessings and riches and stuff must mean they're in the will of God. Look at that church. It's nice. Look at that person. Man, everything he does is good. He must really be doing God's work. Worldly riches is not a sign of godly blessings. I have found in my personal experience, the most blessed people don't have much when it comes to this world. They don't have much at all, but they have the love of Christ. They have a love for others, and they live a very content life. Matter of fact, the more you have, the less content I find people to be. The Bible's pretty clear. Those that trust in riches, they're gonna have a pretty hard time entering the kingdom of God. Not impossible. With God, all things are possible. But it's going to be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, right? Psalm 37:16, I have that marked down here, is a little that a righteous man hath is better than the riches of many wicked. All right, so verse 9 says, and I that am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt will yet make thee to dwell in tabernacles, as in the days of the solemn feast. Oh boy, what does that mean? I mean, imagine imagine what it took to build America, right? Imagine the sacrifice, the work, the rebellion, the revolution, and then all of the industry, the world wars, the things that led to what America was at its pinnacle, right? It was a tough time. Most people don't want to go out west and risk their lives today and have to fight for everything and risk all these different illnesses and diseases on the Oregon Trail and all these things, right? They're not eager to do that again. We like to think about it in our minds because it seems like an adventure, but in real life, it was a tough thing. We don't want to go back to the evils in the history of America, the evils of slavery, the evils of Jim Crow. We don't want to go back to that. We don't want to go back to all these wars we got involved in because America was a work in progress. But finally, it began to get things straightened out. Things started to improve at one point in our history. Well, look at Israel. They had to come out of Egypt. They were in Egypt. They were slaves. They were worshiping all kinds of gods. until God took them out and made a covenant with them at Sinai. But during that trip, they didn't always listen. And when they got to the promised land, what happened? He said, go. And they said, we're not going. So they had to dwell in tents and never have a home till they all died off from that generation. 20 years old and up, right? They all had to live in tents. But finally, at long last, they had permanently settled a land that God had promised them they would inherit forever. Imagine what he promised them. You will have that land forever. And read what that verse says. You're going back to the tents. You're no longer going to live here. That's pretty terrifying stuff. Again, be a Jew. We just read it as the word tabernacle. But be a Jew for a minute and say, wow, no more houses, no more permanent dwelling. All this land that I promised you forever, you're out. That sounds like God's prophecy was broken, right? But there is yet a time they will inherit the land, and it will be forever. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth that they will dwell in forever, right? So they feel secure in their homes and their cities, but God has no trouble in breaking down walls and sending you back out. Again, America has a whole lot of trust in its military and its technological might and in its power. Let me tell you, compared to God, all that could be gone in an instant, not even an instant. And we could be way worse off than we've ever been in our history. I hope you're praying for your country and your leaders and praying for others, right? Because we don't know if we have tomorrow, even in America, which still to this day is the greatest country in the world to live in my opinion, at this day, right now.
This is one of the reasons why students are fear that the church is being judged in this hour.
And I think you're, yeah. Are we rising up or are we not?
Well, the big fear. We are about to have a national pride again.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's now happening on the National Day of Pride, we invite all religions of the world to come to the capital.
Mm-hmm. Pray with the Christians.
And we all pray to our God. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, my problem, do I really believe when they bow their head and we Christians pray to our God? Are they respecting God? And then when they pray to their God in a Christian mind, for me, there's something happening in the kingdom of God that is not right. What's going on here? We got justified, and too often Christians justify the actions of America. But I put it again, because we are worshiping the Constitution and not the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And
We like what we like, and we ignore what we don't like. And at the end of the day, I'm not bashing the church, but it surely sounds like I am. Many Christians don't even like to pray. They don't even like to pray. I have a hard time reminding myself to pray. But we had a prayer list 30 long, at least 20 long, something like that. There's no reason we shouldn't say, guys, here's the list at noon on Saturday. We're going to meet here. If you can't meet here, stop whatever you're doing, get on your knees. And here's what we're praying for. But we don't see that. We don't see it here. We don't see it very much anywhere. And that's not how it should be. We should be coming together when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. He is there in the midst. When 2 come together and ask something in his name, our Father in heaven will do it. That's what Jesus tells us, Prayer, I think, is undervalued. It's a key part of the armor of God. It's right there with the armor of God when it's described, but people don't value it.
since you said that, gave it for Saturday, we can bow outside.
Mm-hmm.
Gave it for Saturday.
Thank you.
15 minutes.
Where are you reading right now? Where are you guys reading right now? Oh, so it doesn't have to be a specific place. Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's the thing. We need to be doing this. Live out our faith, right? Okay. So then we get to verse 10 through 12. It says, I have also spoken by the prophets. I have multiplied visions and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. Is there iniquity in Gilead? Surely they are vanity. They sacrifice bullocks in Gilgal. Yea, their altars are as heaps in the furrows of the field. And Jacob fled into the country of Syria, and Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. So God has used every make and manner of method to speak to these people, whether it be in sign, whether it be in miracle, whether it be by prophet, maybe it be by Samson, whether it be by David. He's given him every chance to hear the truth of God. Yet they continue to go back to the world. He had every blessing, everything. But just like Jacob, how did Jacob have to finally trust in God? Remember, Jacob was promised to be the kid who was going to be the heritage. The promises of Abraham would flow through the younger of the two. Remember, his mom, Rebecca, was told, this younger child, the elder will serve the younger, right? But rather than wait on God and let God do, she and her son did, right? And what did they have to do for their lack of faith? Remember, when Jacob left, he did not yet worship God. On his way to Bethel, he made a deal that one day he would worship God, but he still didn't consider God his God. But he had to go until he was ready to understand. You had to go and serve and go under exile, just like Jacob had to run from his brother Esau. Israel would have to run, be in exile, and be dispersed among the nations. And then we get to verse 13 and 14. It says, and by a prophet the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Ephraim provoked him to anger most bitterly. Therefore shall he leave his blood upon him, and his reproach shall his Lord return unto him. Israel is going to get everything they had earned up to this point because of their deceitful behavior. So the kingdom of Judah had its own problems, but this kingdom of Israel had utterly stopped seeking God. They had no interest. God is saying your judgment is on your own head. God will have justice. And they had been given warning after warning after warning, and now judgment was coming. So chapter 13, we'll get right into verse 1. It says, when Ephraim spake trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. But when he offended in Baal, he died. So when Jeroboam, the first king of the kingdom of Israel, when he went before Solomon, when he was there at first, he was speaking respectfully. He was speaking in honor. He was still acknowledging God as the God of Israel. And remember what they talked about, why the nation split? You guys remember that? He said, hey, if you'll cut the taxes, if you cut the tribute, we'll stay and we'll worship you. But if you keep charging us more money, we're going to leave. And he decided to charge more money, and that's what happened. So when they first made the offer, he did it respectfully and was doing the honorable thing. But then whenever he became his own kingdom, Jeroboam and the kingdom of Israel, they immediately started following Baal. And spiritually, they died. They totally had turned away from God. This is a warning to especially non-Christians, but don't ignore the Christians. Anytime you find yourself worshiping anything besides God, you're heading towards spiritual death. I'm not talking about loss of salvation. I'm talking about effective living. There's living, and then there's being alive, and then there's living. There's a difference, okay? We are spiritually alive by Christ, but not everyone lives Christ in their lives. We need to live every day for Christ. So if you find yourself in America worshiping, if you find yourself more knowledgeable and more interested in knowing what some show says, or what some politician says, or some news channel says, rather than what the Word of God says, you are worshiping the wrong thing. What is worship, by the way? So I'm going to tell you what worship is. Anything you're devoted to. So worship can easily be a person other than God, can easily be a place, even church. Some people are extremely devoted to church, but not devoted to God. Be careful. Idolatry is only a step away, right? So, do you think today America trusts more in its military or more in God? The money says it's God. What do you think in real life? What do we trust to keep us safe? The military, which you see the problem here, right? It's never been our military. It's been the fact that at one point we turned to God. And his grace, really, as the song says, he shed his grace on us, right? What have we done with that? Sadly, it's just really, it's so heartbreaking to see what's happened to this country. Yes, sir. Right. It's easier to. Yes, that's exactly right. But faith requires belief in something you can't touch. And that's where the world has lost it, particularly America has lost faith in the unseen God. Verse 2 and 3 says, of Hosea 13, says, and now they sin more and more and have made them molten images of their silver and idols according to their own understanding, all of it the work of the craftsman. They say of them, let the men that sacrifice kiss the calves. Therefore they shall be as the morning cloud and as the early dew that passeth away, and the chaff that is driven with the whirlwind out of the floor, and as the smoke out of the chimney. Think about those different analogies there. Vanity, pointless, useless, worthless, of no value. They chose vanity instead of truth. The soul of the nation was empty, was void of God. The leadership had fallen apart. The families had fallen apart. Crime and violence were widespread. They followed meaningless paths to be rather than be the people of God. Does that sound familiar? I mean, it's ridiculously familiar. Just like the morning cloud. You know, whenever it's going to storm, it's not the little wisp of a cloud in the morning. You got to see gathering clouds throughout the day. But that little cloud comes and then disappears into nothing. Nothing comes of it, right? The dew. Guess what? If it's really dewy, your feet get wet, then you look back an hour later and it's gone, right? The chaff. What do you do with chaff to separate from grain? You throw it in the air and the grain comes back. What's the chaff do? Gone with the wind, as the title of the movie is, right? And of course, smoke. Smoke, is it a solid, liquid, or gas? Kind of a gas, but not exactly, right? So it means nothing, passes away into nothingness. But notice that nothing happens at once. I have, I used to say I'm not that old. I'm actually getting pretty old, I guess. I don't know exactly how old I am, but somewhere in the 40s, 35, 39. So I'm 39 years old. But look at what's happened in America. We have little faith in our laws. We see the faith in those enforcing the laws eroding, right? We don't trust our courts. They become tools of whoever yells the loudest rather than of justice, right? Politicians who are puppets to whoever can pay the most. Isn't that where we're at, right? So if you trust in any one of those things, good luck. Best of luck to you. I wish you the best. But instead, why don't you trust in something far beyond that? Trust in God, right? That's what he's begging Israel to do. But verse 4 through 6 says, yet I am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt, and thou shalt know no God but me. It's like, I'm not here to play sharesies or splitsies. It's me, and that's it. For there is no Savior beside me. And as we all, I pray, know, there is no other name under heaven whereby you must be saved. It is only Jesus Christ, nothing else. Verse 5 says, I did know thee in the wilderness and in the land of great drought. According to their pasture, so were they filled. They were filled, and their heart was exalted. Therefore have they forgotten me. See the problem with satisfaction? If you've never, ever, ever had a Pepsi and you grew up in an impoverished nation where all you had was muddy water to drink, and then somebody brings you an ice cold Pepsi, you'll be the happiest day of your life. But on the other hand, if every day you drop by McDonald's at 8 a.m., get yourself a, I don't know, bacon cheeseburger or something. What do you get for breakfast? A McMuffin, and a Pepsi. Guess what? You won't care about the Pepsi. If they said the Pepsi machine was broke, you wouldn't even think about it, right? The more satisfied you are, the less thankful you are. That's why the church thrives in persecution. It brings out the true believers. Just be careful where your gratitude is. Be careful when you feel like the whole world's falling apart. Realize and remember how much we have to be grateful for. If nothing else, we will spend an eternity with Jesus Christ. If nothing else. Forget the fact that we eat, we drink, we're dressed, we have all this. We can meet here. We have the Bible, we have the Word of God. So many things to be grateful for. You couldn't even make a list. But whenever they were filled, they forgot them. Beware satisfaction. Beware giving yourself every comfort of life. Be careful. It does not help you to be grateful. Doesn't mean you can't be, but it certainly doesn't help you to be when you got all the comforts of life. Then, verse 7. Therefore, I will be unto them as a lion, as a leopard by the way will I observe them. Then I will meet them as a bear that is bereaved of her whelps, and will rend the call of their heart. And there will I devour them like a lion, and the wild beast shall tear them. What's interesting about those animals you just listed? Yeah, all four of them, actually. So we forgot about the wild beast, verse 8, right? So we have the lion, the leopard, the bear, and the wild beast, the wild creature that didn't have definition. Do you know what that means? Because I don't. I have no idea what the relevance of that is, but it's interesting, right? It's interesting those animals are all listed here as well as Daniel.
Well, you first start by
I know. I wish I had one for him.
The whelps, is that the babies?
The babies, yeah. So if a mama bear has her kids taken, well, you better run, right? So this is a terrible situation, all right? They're like a helpless flock of sheep. That's what we said in the first few verses, right? I drew you in the wilderness, and your pastures you were filled, back in verse 6. They're like sheep. But what happens if the sheep are attacked by a lion and a bear, and there's no good shepherd to tend them? It's not a good thing. Doesn't end well for the sheep. Spoiler alert, right? And that's the problem. There was no shepherd because they refused the shepherd. It's a sad situation when the shepherd wants to protect you and you refuse to be protected. Verse 9 through 11 says, O Israel, here's the answer. Thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. I will be thy king. Where is any other that may save thee in all thy cities? And thy judges of whom thou saidst, give me a king and princes. I gave thee a king in mine anger and took him away in my wrath. So when God comes to judge, don't look for help from the political leaders. Don't look for help from the judges of this world, the social systems. Don't look for the police. Look for God. Don't look for your own strength. Look for God. God puts kings on thrones. God removes them. For some reason, Americans have a very difficult time understanding this. God chooses the leader. Well, you just wait till next election. I'm going to take care of who's president. God's still going to pick the next president, just as he picked the last one and the one before that, right? No amount of laws that you pass, no amount of moral stands that you have, you cannot, and I've said this before, but you cannot legislate people into Christianity. You can't give them a set of laws and say, now you have to be Christians. Constantine tried this. It was a catastrophe for the church, an absolute catastrophe. We're not looking to change the laws of the nations. We're looking to save souls. Have I become like a broken record? I feel like I'm a broken record. So remember, according to Israel, guess what the law of their nation was still? The Torah. The kingdom of Israel still had the Torah as their law. How well did that do that for them? Did legislation work for them? Did they say, okay, no abortions, everyone's got to go to church on Sunday, You can't blow. I mean, all these laws didn't help them, right? Or on Saturday, I guess the Sabbath in their story.
You know what? I see Israel though, after the time, most of all these kingdoms.
Yeah. Yes, they were. You get to verse 12 and 13 of chapter 13. It says, the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up, his sin is hid. The sorrows of a travailing woman shall come upon him. He is an unwise son, for he should not stay long in the place of the breaking forth of children. The nation of Israel had not responded to God's call after call after call to repentance. He had given them a bunch of grace. He had given them a lot of patience, but they refused to turn to him. They're like a baby who refuses to be born. That's what he said. He said he should not stay long in the place of breaking forth the children. He's a baby that refused to be born. He refused to join the family of God, utterly and completely. They had failed to tell the world that God loved the world, that God wanted to save the world. Israel was supposed to be a nation of priests, not just a tribe, but the whole nation is supposed to tell the world. But instead, they refused to be saved themselves, to be born into the family of God. So they needed someone else to save them. And that someone else, I know his name. Verse 14 says, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. This sounds like a promise, actually. This is a rhetorical question. It says, like, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be thy plagues. O grave, I will be thy destruction. Repentance shall be hid from mine eyes. So, of course, from the spiritual standpoint, Jesus did ransom us from the grave. He did destroy death. But from their perspective, he's telling them that the death and the grave will overcome them. Because that continues on with that same idea in the next verse, verse 15 and 16. It says, though he be fruitful among his brethren, Ephraim was the most fruitful of the tribes, an east wind shall come, the wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness, and his springs shall become dry, and his fountains shall be dried up, and he shall spoil the treasure of all pleasant vessels. Samaria, their capital, shall become desolate, for she hath rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their infants shall be dashed in pieces, and their women with child shall be ripped up. God's compassion is removed from Israel, and devastation and death is coming for them. So by the time you come to the end of this chapter, there's like no hope. This is going to be a disaster after disaster. The kingdom of Israel is in trouble, but there is good news. And that's in the next chapter. We're going to see a total change of tone in this final chapter, which is a fairly short one. So there is hope coming. And what's that hope? Verse 1 of chapter 14. O Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. God's hands, despite all of the rebellion, is still outstretched. He wants to see everyone come home. Their fall was their own fault, but he's willing to pick them up. Verse 2, take with you words and turn to the Lord and say unto him, take away all iniquity, receive us graciously, so we will render the calves of our lips. Come back to God and ask repentance. No matter how far you've fallen, Israel, come to God. He's ready, willing, and eager to grasp you and return you. The same applies today. No matter how far you are from Jesus Christ, no matter how much sin you carry, he's desperate. He's literally dying or died to save you, to redeem you, right? So the kingdom of Israel, they never took him up on this offer historically. The Jewish people still living today will see him redeeming them once they realize that God is the one allowing this judgment during the tribulation. There will come a day where the remnant look back to these passages and they realize what they did to their Messiah, what they had the Romans do, whatever you want to word it. They will return, and guess what? Will they find an angry God? Or will they find a loving Father, eager to restore them? Praise God for his mercy and his grace. Only the Messiah can take away the iniquity that we all have and receive us graciously. Go ahead, Tom.
It's kind of along the line, way down You still have God.
Yeah, no matter where you are, the depths of the sea, he is there. In the heights of the hills, he is there. Everywhere, right? Verse 3 and 4 of chapter 14 says, Asher will not save us. He will not ride, we will not ride upon horses. We say Asher here, we're talking about Assyria, not the tribe of Asher. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, ye are our gods, for in thee the fatherless find mercy. I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for mine anger is turned away from him. God's deepest desire is to save and to redeem. There is nothing he wants to do more than I can tell. He wants to bring Israel back in the fold, just as he wants to bring all people to salvation. He created us in his image. Every single human being, everyone is infinitely valuable to him. Imagine how valuable someone would have to be to you that you would have your own child die for them. Just think about that. I mean, that doesn't blow your mind every time you think about that? You're not thinking hard enough. That's how valuable I was to him. Give me a break. My kids, they don't think of me that valuably, but God does. And my kids love me. But think of how much God loves me, so much more, right? What's the promise given to Israel when they finally come to this? Now notice, he knows that one day they'll return. Hosea is aware. He's telling him, verse 5 says, I will be as the dew unto Israel. He shall grow as the lily and cast forth his roots as Lebanon. His branches shall spread. His beauty shall be as the olive tree and his smell as Lebanon. They that dwell under his shadow shall return, and they shall revive as the corn and grow as the vine. The scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. So everything, all the negativity we've seen up to now is changing into this promise of hope, this chance of renewal, this new life, or let me put it this way, this new birth, to be born again, right? So the cedar tree is a very majestic tree. It's one of the few, I don't know if they're called like pines or what family they're in, coniferous or whatever, but their seeds or their, how you get the pine cones, they're usually hanging down from the trees, not in the cedars of Lebanon. It's the only breed of cedar that it grows up. It grows up towards heaven. It's like reaching up to the skies. It's magnificently large trees. This center circle here is like the size of the trunk. I've been in the trees of it. She's been in the trees of it. It's amazing. The lily of the valley is a beautiful plant. An olive tree, the amazing thing about it is there's so many berries on every olive tree, so many olives, right? It's going to be extremely fruitful and it'll be protected by God. So something that has not happened for several thousand years will happen. The entire planet Earth will be blessed by Israel. Everyone says that they that dwell under shadow shall return. They shall revive as the corn and grow as the vine. So everyone's going to be blessed by Israel. Well, how are they going to receive blessing from Israel? Well, from the son of Israel. Who's the child that comes out of Israel? Again, the whole Bible's about him, Jesus Christ. It'll no longer be an insult to be called a Jew. Throughout history, it's been an insult, but it'll soon be a blessing. When will that come? Second coming of Christ. So verse 8 and 9, this is the final verses. And Ephraim shall say, what have I to do any more with idols? They're done with that. I have heard him and observed him. I am like a green fir tree. From me is thy fruit found. Who is wise and he shall understand these things? Prudent, and he shall know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall therein. So when will these things come to be? When will Israel flourish and no longer need their military? When Jesus sits on the throne, right? When he is the king, and he is going to be the king. That new healed Israel will be a lush tree, fruit branching to the whole world. This is just a picture of Jesus Christ. This is all about the Messiah. The only way that Jesus is going to be a blessing to the world is that he's going to forgive humanity despite their wickedness. And that can't come from man. It can only come from God. And the word of God teaches truth and righteousness. But those who are wicked and want to reject it, they will read these passages and be totally confused and say, this is a bunch of nonsense and full of contradiction. They're the ones that are talking nonsense. Let the word of God be true. Let God be true and every man a liar. All right. With that being said, we'll stop here.